Good morning. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us here today for our first hybrid WorkFutures Lab. We have some people in the room here with us this morning, and thank you and welcome. Thank you for making the effort to come in and meet with us. And then we have a number of you online. So we're going to get stuck into our lessons in leadership very quickly. What we're doing today, based on feedback we got from the members of our WorkFutures Lab, was to provide you with some broad range insights from different perspectives on the challenge of leadership in organisations today. Now, this has been a journey for us in the WorkFutures Lab, and I'm going to move on to my next slide, and my clicker isn't working. Thank you, Keith. We have been on a journey in relation to leadership in the WorkFutures Lab for a number of years now, commissioned and sponsored largely by the Irish Centre of Business Excellence, however, interweaving it with other pieces of research that are happening in the Kemmy Business School. And what we know about leadership is we very much are at a pivotal point in really needing to challenge ourselves as leaders and the leaders in the organisation, leadership in a broader sense, because leadership does somewhat appear to be broken. We have a next generation, or rather a group of emerging leaders who are looking up and really seriously questioning whether they want to step up and respond to the organisation's call to lead. We are also seeing those in leadership roles really challenged by issues around stress and work-life balance and risk, and just the weight of leadership in today's complex world and business landscape. So in our previous leadership study, we're starting to unpick these issues one by one. We know that the leaders who are there today are very much telling us that it is a new type of leader that is needed, a leader that is more curious about the shared leadership across the organisation in a way to help them navigate the risk and uncertainty at the top. We are dealing with very complex business problems that one individual or even a group of 8 at the top of the organisation are struggling to navigate. And therefore, this concept of distributing leadership around the organisation to really bring up the voice of the organisation and the expertise and knowledge that is in with the organisation is really critical. But in order to do that, what is the new type of leader that we need? It is somebody who comes at leadership from a place of humility, appreciating that they don't have all the answers, they may not even have all the questions, and that they need to leverage the resources of the organisation to get there. They're also very much situated in a role of coaching and listening rather than command and controlling or directing. To do that, the skills that they need are shifting. We take business acumen and competency in terms of the context of the organisation and the market as a given, but layered on top of that, we have new thoughts on skills and the importance of self-regulation in terms of managing the workload, the stress, being able to maintain a very clear head in order to have a clear perspective on the listening that needs to happen in the organisation and the decision making that needs to occur. But in order to have that kind of self-regulation, there is a significant challenge around work-life balance and stress for leadership today. About a third of the leaders that we met with during this previous study were classified as burnt out. So that's a very critical challenge for leadership, and probably feeds into why emerging leaders are beginning to question whether or not they want to step up. Coupled with self-regulation, we see much more conversation now today about the importance of leaders managing their own emotions. So the idea of emotional regulation. And this is really multifaceted because as a coach, one needs to be very calm and consistent in one's thought and action. But also as a coach and a listener, where leadership is more distributed around the organisation, one needs to be calm and consistent in terms of one's own humility with regard to the role in the organisation. Now, we will send you copies of this previous report. It's about 18 months old now, but today we're going to go on and talk about different aspects. We're starting to try and unpack these skills now of how we manage risk and uncertainty, how we lead and coach from a point of humility, and how we manage our own day and self in order to manage our own emotions for perspective, calm and consistent thought and deed in the workplace. I will give you a little plug here as well, if I may, for our new leadership experience in UL. This is a senior leadership 6-day program delivered in 2 blocks of 3, where we bring together 12 senior business leaders at a time to really critically think about this, where the leaders, all coming from different organisations and walks of life, critically discuss all of these elements with a select group of our leadership academics. It's 3 days in October and 3 days in December. We will send you the link as we journey across the UL campus to leverage the best of our academic insight from strategic and leadership scholars, organisational psychologists in the field of leadership. You're going to be meeting 2 of them later today. But we also bring you on a journey into creative spaces with our creative writing school, where we look at the signalling, the messaging, the storytelling of leadership, and also to our World Academy of Music and Dance, where we look at signalling and symbols, the unspoken word of leadership, and also the notion of the improvisation of leadership. So it's a really interesting experience. And I know both here in the room and online today, we have some of our class of 23, 24, if I can call you that. But we will send you details about this as well for those that have registered today. So without further ado, I'm not going to do long introductions. I'm just going to let you know that we have 5 people talking today, each taking 20 minutes to look at leadership from a different angle. My colleagues in the business school, Moanne, Paolo, Maeve and Claire, will be looking at, in order, the role of courage in leadership, the role of civility in leadership and the workplace. We will then be looking at a small business case study who took a very courageous act for the entire organisation and what that might have looked like, because it's all well and good to talk about courage, but what does it look like, and how do you need to put the process and people in behind a large act of courage in the organisation? And then we'll be moving on to my colleague Maeve, who is taking this sustainable leadership research for her PhD onto the next phase, talking to people in organisations. We call those emerging leaders, the people in the talent pool that we think are going to be leaders of the future. This is a piece of work that again is sponsored by ICBE, and we're looking at really early findings from focus groups. And I know as well online that we have some of you who participated in the focus groups here to get those early findings today. Then finally, weaving everything together, no big ask for her, we have Orla Walsh, who is a leader here with Dell Technologies in Limerick. And Orla is going to reflect on everything she's heard this morning and then share her leadership journey and how what she's heard might resonate looking in the rearview mirror with how she got to where she is today in Dell. So we'll have a 10-minute presentation and then we'll open up to the floor here and at home or in the office in your virtual space for questions. But we're going to move fairly swiftly along, aiming to finish bang on 1 o'clock. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to invite my colleague Moanne to come up and take her place for her session. Thanks, Moanne.
Sarah. Great. Thank you for coming. It's always exciting first thing in the morning or ish to talk about courage, which is a word we don't often say at work, or we don't often talk about and think about what does that mean. Usually, oftentimes we think about it in very big terms. But interestingly enough, when I talk to leaders, when I kind of look at whether it's regular media, business media, I see a lot of calls for leaders to be courageous, and there's a bunch of different Forbes, Times, whatever magazine that say we need courageous leaders. But the question is, what do we actually mean? Are we asking you to be courageous? What are we really asking you to do? Especially given that we usually think about courage in moral terms, doing the right thing. We think about courage as something that's heroic, saving somebody who's drowning. But what do we really want? And in an environment that is very complex, becoming more complex, uncertain, your job is already quite complicated enough. So what do we want from you? Why are we asking you to be courageous, and what does that mean? So in my research, in my work, I do a lot of thinking about that. I've been talking to leaders in different roles in different places. What does that really mean to be courageous? And I want to step out of that very moral. It's not just about doing the right thing, or kind of like our immediate associations are Enron or Facebook more recently in terms of scandals and ethics. That's one aspect of courage. But when we talk about courage, and the way we define courage is pursuit of something meaningful under conditions of perceived risk to the actor. It's a bit of a mouthful there. But what it really means is any time that you're trying to achieve something personal or at work, organizational, individual, team, that has some kind of meaning, some kind of significance, some kind of importance, whether it's for us as individuals, for our organizations, for our teams. But there's some kind of risk that is associated with taking action. We're in the courage domain there. And that risk doesn't have to be huge. Again, if we think about what we usually associate with courage, big moral actions, we think about getting fired, losing our jobs, derailing our careers, losing our lives in more extreme kind of heroic situations. But courage doesn't have to be that big and huge. It can be something a lot smaller, like I'm now going to have a really awkward conversation, and it's going to be really awkward coming into the office tomorrow. Or my colleague here that I need to work with them, and we're going to disagree, and it's going to be a hard conversation. And that's going to be a situation I'm going to have to manage. So it can be really a variety of different things. And this quote up there is from a research on leadership and courage, and really kind of even saying, stepping up. And obviously, when you're in a formal leadership position, you have the authority to come and say, I'm the boss. It doesn't mean that making the hard decision is easy and does not require courage. But that's where courage can come in. And I think part of the call for leaders to be courageous is to take those hard decisions. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. And the question to ask is, why does it even require courage, right? Part of your job as leaders is to make decisions. That's what you do. And manage change, manage things happening in the organization. So where does courage come in? What is the problem there? And the thing is that there's risk. And Sarah mentioned before, uncertainty, risks. So the way we in academia would define risk is any kind of variation in distribution of possible outcomes, likelihoods, and subjective values. Basically, what it means is whenever we're not sure about what's going to happen, whether it's getting something positive, not getting something positive, or getting some kind of a negative outcome, that's when there's risk. So it can be a risk in pursuing this new strategy that can be really good for us, or maybe you're going to take this action and there's going to be some issue there, some negative outcomes, whether they're financial or any other way. So that's a realm of risk. And we know that the world is more uncertain. There's more risks involved. So decision making is also becoming more and more complex. Your job is becoming more and more complex. It's not the world of 50, 60 years ago, that the industry is quite stable. There are changes, but they're not so fast. Everything is changing fast. There's all these things that are happening. And that makes your job a lot harder. Making those decisions is more challenging. And when we talk about risk, it can be financial risks, whether it's losing money to the organization or individually, reputation. So again, for the reputation of our organization, and we see a lot of that happening recently, how are our actions and decision going to be perceived by our customers, by industry, by shareholders, different stakeholders. When we're looking more personally as leaders, so our decisions, our actions are going to have and can have career-related outcomes. If I make the wrong decision, what does that mean in terms of my future in this company or in the business? And then things like relationships, right? I'm going to make some decision. Maybe we're reorganizing. There's a merger. People are going to be moved around. People are not going to be happy. And that is another risk. And the thing with risk, some of the risks are very clear and objective. Like it's very clear that there's going to be that or this financial impact, for example. But a lot of times, and this is where it gets really interesting, it's not always objective. It's not always clear. For some people, that awkwardness of having a difficult conversation is not a big deal. Okay, fine. I'm just going to say it, and that's what I need to do. For other people, that's a lot more daunting and threatening. So what risk is changed from person to person. And that's the big context, right, of those risks in which we need to now make decisions. And these decisions in different areas, even whether you're a team leader or the CEO, your decisions have impact across a wide range of people within and outside of the organization. There's a lot at stake at times. So even, again, going back to the quote from before, just stepping up and making that decision can require courage. I think we can think about a lot of leaders that don't actually make the decisions. They'll throw in something that's not committal because they're scared of making that decision. So this is where we need courage to come in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what can help us be more courageous in these decisions or in these spheres. But first, I want to talk about two types of courage or two types of decision making and what makes it important to have courage in those contexts. So the first is the courage to say yes. So there's a bunch of opportunities that are, might come up and things that we may want to pursue. But a lot of times we see that organizations don't do it. We do a bunch of work. I do a lot of work on stretch goals, these unattainable goals, really hard goals, but the ones that can really make a huge difference for the organization and even society level. And a lot of times we see that instead of pursuing those really big goals, companies just don't. Just sit, keep doing what they're doing. They're not really pivoting and doing something different. There's a lot of aversion around making those decisions. But sometimes what we need organizations to do these. We need organizations to tackle these grand challenges, whether it's sustainability, poverty, innovation, what's going to be our next big thing. So we need organizations to take those leaps. But a lot of times they don't, especially those organizations that are actually the ones we want them to pursue it, the ones that are well positioned to actually achieve those goals or make real progress, they don't. Whether it's because of inertia, we're on a trajectory, but why change? It ain't broken, don't fix it. Everything is going well, especially when we see successful companies that have like the background of success, the resources, everything is looking good. Why do we need to shake the boat? Everything is going well. Why now pursue this crazy thing? And then there's risk aversion. We know from a lot of research that as humans, we don't like risk. We are sensitive to negative outcomes. So again, that goes back to that inertia. We're just staying where we are. And in kind of throwing it a little bit, and I'll say more later, this is where we need to think about the meaning, right? If courage is about doing something meaningful, can we think about why is it meaningful? Why is it important? Why is it worth the risk? But on the flip side of that, we do see a lot of times where organizations say yes when they really shouldn't. And this is when we need the courage to say no. So not all organizations, not all decisions are going to be good decisions. Sometimes we need to not do that. And what we do see in different cases is that organizations would go for broke. They're in a bad spot already. It's a tight situation, and making that decision, for example, we're not doing great, there's this really big investment. If it's going to succeed, that's going to shoot us up. If it's going to fail, that's it for us. So it's a big decision, and we see that a lot of times the tendency is to go for broke. Well, we might as well just do something other than sit here and not do something. And in those cases, we really don't want that to happen. So there's factors like in teams especially, we know that teams tend to make more risky decisions than individuals, what we call the risky shift. Again, in the team context, everybody is going in a certain direction. How do we go in a different direction? Resist the groupthink and our tendency to take action. And again, that's tendency we do have in those maybe more challenging situations. We have a tendency, we need to do something. We feel like if we just sit and do nothing, as opposed to when we're well positioned, we're very happy with sitting and doing nothing. When we're not doing so great, our tendency is we have to do something. Otherwise, we're just going to let the ship sink. But we cannot do that. So we have that tendency, that action bias. There are social costs at speaking up at the team level when everybody, again, is shifting towards we got to do this. This is what we need to do. It's very hard to stand up and say, well, actually, I think differently, going back to those social risks, maybe relational risks, reputational risks, and then also connected to how we think about ourselves. Are we the kind of person just going to sit there and say, no, we'll be the naysayer, we're the one that doesn't take action, we're not proactive. So there's a bunch of different reasons to why we're going to avoid saying no. But in certain situations, that's where we need to find the courage to not pursue the risky decision. So there's two flip sides. When do we stand up? When do we make that decision versus when our decision is not to take the decision or to not take action? It's a different kind of decision. So what can help us after kind of throwing in a little bit of thinking about those, and maybe you have some thoughts on when you needed to say yes, when you needed to say no, but how can we be more courageous? So we're asking you to be courageous. Well, how can you do that? So the first thing is just recognize, name it. Oh, okay, there's something meaningful here and there's some risks. That calls for courage. And oftentimes we don't label these situations as courage because we think about those big moral, heroic actions. So just name it. Oh, that requires courage. And what we find is that actually helps people. I can say for myself, I'm like, oh, that requires courage. Okay, well, maybe I need to do that. So starting there. And then again, going back to those elements of meaning and risk, we know that when something is really meaningful, we hear people will say, look, yeah, I was a lot to lose, but I could not do it. I had to go ahead and do it. Thinking about the risk, what are the risks? Is it really risky? How risky is it? Maybe mitigate the risk or change our perceptions. And then another thing from a new research that we're working on, thinking about when did you do something that was meaningful but involved risk? And I'm sure you can think of at least one thing, and I dare say probably more, that you did something that was meaningful, that was significant, but involved risk to yourself. Well, that means you're courageous. You're the kind of person who does courageous things. So what we find in our research is when we reframe that, people then we think differently about ourselves. We feel like we have higher self-efficacy to do courageous things, and it changes a little bit how we think about our identities, and that can help us be more courageous. So I'll leave you with that. And if we have any questions. Courageous questions, maybe you're a courageous person to speak up.
I'll throw one out there.
Yeah.
From a perspective of knowing when it's groupthink versus knowing when it's the right choice, right? So sometimes that decision can be really hard to balance up. And then you look at, the experience of the group versus perhaps your innovative ideas. How best to frame that when you're dealing with the group things, saying, okay, look, I'm going to step forward and make this decision.
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? How do we, when we know what we got to do, right? And we know that now we need to bring this opposite decision to the group, whether to convince them or if I'm the decision maker and I need to bring them on my side, that's a tricky thing. And I think a lot of it is, there'll be two elements, right? There's a decision itself, like the logical, strategic explanation, which you know how to do. But I think there's the people side of it, right? And I think that's kind of going to listen to the humility and understanding, kind of like when we talk about change management, right? Like I know that I'm coming in and I know I'm going to have some resistance there. So I think first of all, really listening, right? Why is that resistance going to come? Are they just, am I diagnosed? Oh, they're just going for risk. So really understanding where is this coming from, with an open mind rather than, and I'm not saying we're dismissing, but like, is there real genuine resistance here? Like is there real reason to disagree with me on this? And I would say kind of like before we bring it in, do question ourselves. It's good sometimes, like once we made the decision, we want to pursue it, but we do want to sometimes ask, is it the right decision? So really kind of, I think, be open to that. And I think as with anything with leadership, like what are the concerns, right? Where is this coming from? And trying to tackle those underlying motivations. And I would say, and I think you probably would know your teams better, but maybe to kind of surface, look, we're in a team. We know we might feel like we need to take more of a risk. So let's maybe put that aside. But I think it is a lot around kind of like there's the actual content, and then there's the people that I need to understand what's happening here. I need to understand why this is happening, and then kind of tackling it, I think, directly or in some version of directly.
Moanne, we have a question from Barry from Rent a Recruiter, who is asking, if decisions are usually harder, does it mean they're the right ones then? Is there a relationship between how hard it is to make a decision and getting to the right decision, do you think?
That's a great question. I think people, because it's hard, right? Sometimes if it's an easy decision, it's just immediate. Okay, great. I know what I need to do. I can do it. So it can signal to us, yeah, maybe there's something there that I need to reflect on. That's a great question. I actually haven't thought about it, but I'd say definitely, yeah. Because if we find that we're, with ourselves, sometimes we kind of implicitly already know what's the right decision, but it's hard to make that. So definitely I'd say, yeah, let's stop and try to then analyze, like we said before, in response to Orla, do other people resist it? Well, why do I resist it? Why do I find it difficult? Is it about the risk? But what might be the risks and how can I tackle that? Because there is that psychological, emotional experience that sometimes we just have to jump in, right? We just have to do it scared, right? Okay, we just have to do it. But sometimes that gut feeling might tell us something. So we want to make sure that we're, we don't want to be too risk seeking. So really kind of figure out, but I'd say that's a good, insight into if it's hard to make, let's ask ourselves some questions of why and try to understand what's maybe stopping us and see how we can tackle those.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Breda, who is a really interesting question again. How can you get people to engage in courage within a very conservative cultured organization where courage and creativity kind of isn't the done thing?
Yeah.
And are there even particular questions you could pose that might kind of encourage courage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's what a lot of us are facing, environments where even, right, you're asked to be courageous. Well, I always see it in organizations put courage as a value. Do you really want courage? Do you really want people to not question everything? I don't know about that. And I think a lot of people would find themselves in similar situations. So I would definitely say would be a few elements there. So kind of thinking in terms of psychological safety, right? We want to allow for mistakes and errors and for things to go wrong. I think there's a lot of modeling that happens there. If we want our people to be courageous, but we have to do that first. So I think it's through like regular leadership, right? Talk about it, model it. I think when you see those people kind of coming up, really encourage it. So there's a lot of leadership to get courage. And I think even naming it, and I think this work that I've really briefly mentioned, well, saying courage is not necessarily a big thing. So if I can identify, even if somebody came to have a conversation, I said something at a meeting and one of my, team members came and said, look, you said that, it didn't land well. It wasn't good. And they come to me and it's not a fun experience for me, but if I can say, you know what, thanks for coming and telling me that, because I'm sure that wasn't easy and I really appreciate it. So I think it's really reinforcing when that happens, even naming it. That was really courageous of you to come in and talk to me. Thank you. Let's do that again. So I think these are the kind of things that can help. So just a lot of leadership there.
Yes, go on.
More for the content, just building on Breda's question, and again, Orla's, and that situation where you're in a conservative culture, you're part of groupthink, and you're being the courageous leader, and you're probably maybe in the minority, and you're trying to protect your self-efficacy and build on it. What is the best approach to try and do that?
Yeah, it's hard, and it's interesting. Most of the work on courage is on the individual. We don't yet have a good understanding of like the organization level of that, but it is, I think, a lot of them pushing it up. Like I talked about, example pushing it down, but we actually have to manage up and see how we can create a more open culture, which is a huge challenge, right? Because also, again, we're taking a risk ourselves by encouraging maybe those below us to be more courageous. So I'm not sure I have a very good evidence-based answer to that because we just don't know enough. But I think, again, there's a lot of leadership, kind of upward leadership, and, trying maybe to frame things in that way. But yeah, that's a good question, because I think it is, to get people to be courageous, we have to create environments where they can actually do that. So I think, again, around psychological safety, which is hard. We all know it's great, but it's really hard to actually do that.
So it's the big thing once the hard decision is taken based on your courage and you've kind of identified the risk, is the biggest thing then really to make success of that is buy-in, either upwards or sideways, to get that buy-in kind of, identify the risks and put the belief in the decision to get that over the line almost.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is where also that kind of content-wise conversation, right, comes in, as in getting people on board, which we all know we all need to do it all the time anyway in leadership. And what I'm really interested in, and again, it's something that we're kind of really starting to touch on, is what happens when we call it courage, because we value courage, right? We talk about courage as a virtue. It's a good thing. We like courageous people. But what happens if we kind of name it that way? If we can frame it even upwards, look, I know we're in this, we have these constraints, we have these boundaries, but why don't we do this courageous thing? Let's try. I think also there's something through that label of naming it as such that might help us in getting a little bit of that more psychological buy-in, a little bit. Get like, oh, yeah, I want us to be courageous. Yeah, it's a good thing, but I don't have any research on that yet, but I would love to. I'd love to do that because I think it's important. I think it's really important. All right, I will step down, but I'd love to talk more. Thank you.
We'll talk more at one. Thank you very much, Moan. Paolo.
Yeah. All right. So before I start my presentation, I just want to say thank you, Sarah, for organizing this lovely seminar and for inviting me to talk about a topic that I'm passionate about. Okay. So when I was preparing my presentation, I was wondering how should I kick off this presentation? How should I introduce the topic civility in the workplace? Should I kick it off by defining civility, just like in lectures with my students? Or should I start sharing personal experience about civility? Or should I start talking about research on civility? It was actually quite challenging. But then I remembered my colleague from Italy, and we are currently writing a book chapter about incivility, which is the opposite of civility. And it was from the book Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. And it says, respect is like air. As long as it's present, nobody thinks about it. But if you take it away, it's all people can think about. And what I really like this quote because it perfectly describes the importance of respect by comparing it to the air that we breathe in. Respect is an essential and integral part of our human interaction. Therefore, it often goes unnoticed when it is when it is actually present in the situation. Much like breathing, people do not actively think about respect when it is consistently present in the situation because it becomes an integral part of the interactions and relationships. The quote also emphasizes the importance of lack of respect. People become aware of it when it is not actually present in the situation or when it's not present in the conversation, just as we become acutely aware when air is taken away from us. Now, simply put, civility and respect, it becomes the focal point of attention which is absent in the situation, dominating people's attention and perceptions. Now, we all have our own definitions of civility. And Anderson and Pearson defined civility as behaviors related to politeness and showing regard for others. Now, we can create a list of words that are synonymous to civility. So such as like positive, good nature, professionalism, courtesy, politeness. But actually one word stands out, respect. Now, civility and respect are core elements that every employee should experience or entitled in the workplace. Now, in a survey conducted by Georgetown University, among 20,000 employees worldwide, showing respect was really critical for employees. And when they were asked what matters to them, it's the respect from their superiors is their top priority or is critical really for them. Now, employees appreciate two types of respect in the workplace. The first type is owed respect. And this is type of respect which is given equally to all members of the organization or work group. It is indicated by courteous and respectful behavior that shows that every employee in the organization is valuable or worthy of respect. The second type of respect is earned respect, which is given to employees who demonstrate exceptional qualities or behaviors that are highly valued by the organization. Now, leaders must strike a balance between owing respect and earning it, because just to ensure that their employees feel respected. And when the employees experience respect or feel respected in the workplace, they're more likely to be grateful and remain loyal in their organization. Now, research in respect in the workplace show that there are several positive outcomes. And one of them is that, according to Clark and Mahadi, civility in the workplace is positively associated with employee well-being and job performance. The same authors in a different study found that civility in the workplace increases effective commitment and job satisfaction. Now, Pora and colleagues in 2015 argued that a respectful work environment enhances work collaboration. And they actually added that employees who report feelings or report respected by their managers demonstrate high levels of work engagement and commitment to their organization. And finally, Nang in 2016 found that civility in the workplace increases organizational embeddedness. So when we talk about organizational embeddedness, it refers to the extent to which employees feel connected to their organization. Now, these findings highlight that civility and respect in the workplace contribute to positive employee attitudes, positive employee well-being, and various organizational outcomes. However, these favorable outcomes at the individual, at the team, and organizational levels are contingent on the quality of interactions in the workplace, and they can be compromised through negative workplace behaviors or workplace mistreatment. And one of them is actually workplace incivility. Now, Anderson and Pearson in 1999 defined incivility as mild discourteous behaviors, which the intent to harm the target can be ambiguous or difficult to discern. Now, these behaviors include derogatory comments, offensive jokes, and disrespectful gestures. Now, workplace incivility is a prominent topic in organizational behavior, employment relations, management, and occupational health psychology. Now, these behaviors, as I mentioned earlier, they are characteristically described as impolite, and they show complete disregard for others, for their well-being. And they violate, most especially, they violate the norms of respect in the workplace. Now, to give you a context on how incivility is pervasive in the workplace, the Society for Human Resource Management conducted a survey just recently, 2 years ago, and they found that out of 1,000 US employees that they surveyed, two-thirds reported experiencing or witnessing incivility in the previous month, and over half of the last week. Now, these figures are quite alarming, and there is an upward trend of incivility in the workplace. And there appears to be an increasing acceptance that incivility becoming a norm in the workplace. Now, these results have serious implications in the workplace. It has serious implications for employees and for organizations, as uncivil behaviors can impact performance and employee retention. Now, as leaders, what can we do to slow down this upward trend? How can we maintain respect and civility at work? And there are various ways to do that. And as leaders, I believe we should set the standards and lead by example. And there are many ways, again, to do this. First, we need to establish and determine the unacceptable behaviors at work. By doing so, creates a safe and respectful environment. It sets clear guidelines for everyone. It sets clear guidance and helps prevent actions that could harm the emotional and cognitive well-being of employees. In addition to that, when we outline unacceptable behaviors, it sets clear expectations for all employees, for everyone, which reduces ambiguity and confusion. As leaders as well, it is our job to disseminate and implement policies that highlight professionalism and respect at work. And leaders also serve as role models for their teams. When they exhibit respectful behaviors, they set a clear example for all employees. Furthermore, leaders' actions significantly influence organizational culture. Demonstrating respect to its members, to each other, embed these values in the workplace culture. The other thing is that leaders should promote a positive work culture. So for instance, when leaders acknowledge diverse perspectives, it creates a safe environment. And Moran mentioned that earlier in the comments, psychological safety, where employees feel comfortable sharing their unique views and experiences. This thing, it promotes open communication, which is essential, really essential for understanding and appreciating the diverse backgrounds and viewpoints of each and every employee. Recognizing positive behavior is about also reinforcement. Recognizing positive and respectful behaviors reinforces these actions to be repeated over and over again. Additionally, acknowledging respectful behaviors boosts employee morale because the positive actions are recognized and they are actually appreciated. It is also important to note for leaders to offer or provide professional development opportunities that relate to civility and professionalism. Now, civility training or professionally respectful, any training relating to civility actually equips employees with the right skills to resolve and manage conflicts effectively. It helps prevent the occurrence of uncivil behaviors, which can lead to other forms of workplace mistreatment and severe conflicts. And finally, I didn't mention here in the slides that promoting a positive work culture enhances employer branding. Now, organizations known for their respectful work environment are more attractive to potential employers or potential employees. Now, I actually wrote a piece for RTE Brainstorm on how to deal with rude coworkers. So I hope the QR code is still working because I set this up a couple of days ago. I'd say it's still working, but feel free to have scanned this one. There are good ways to actually deal rude environment or rude coworkers, and the link should actually lead you to the RTE Brainstorm website. And I'll put it back later on. Now, to conclude my short presentation, work is indeed a social activity. So the interdependence of tasks has made it imperative for organizations to foster a culture of respect in the workplace. Also to note that in today's competitive work environment, positive employee relations are crucial not only for effectiveness and productivity, but also it enhances employee well-being and interpersonal relationships. And as leaders, we have a significant role here to promote civility in workplace, to implement these policies so that we can have a positive work culture. And I hope that leaders here will be inspired to proactively maintain these positive behaviors in the workplace. Thank you very much for listening, and I open now the floor for any questions.
I had a question around, and you've answered it within the presentation. I had
Yeah.
a question written down about how you would tackle incivility in the workplace, and you have answered it by, I suppose, the crucial role of leadership. But what if the issue is with leadership? You know, I suppose I've seen in my experience kind of through manufacturing, leaders being promoted up kind of through the ranks, probably not getting the training needed and the support to be that real leader. So, you know, I suppose what if the issue is in the leadership?
I loved, before going into academia, I work as a healthcare worker for 16, 18 years. So I've experienced that a lot, I've experienced that a lot where my line manager was actually rude and she doesn't acknowledge it. But I suppose the best way to do that is, as a collective, employees should approach the manager, have a kind of like a discussion about it. These are your behaviors these past few years or these past few months. And can we have a constructive discussion of how can we deal with this? Again, going back to what I said earlier, it's really good to have a clear guidelines, what are acceptable and what are unacceptable behaviors. And by doing so, it kind of creates this like, okay, so I'm going beyond my line here, so I should be mindful of my behaviors. I suppose if the leader now is the one violating the norms of respect, as a collective, employees should have a voice and say, like, look, again, going back to what Moran said, courageous aspect here, we should talk to our managers and say, like, this is going on. We can't accept this anymore. We can't tolerate this behavior.
Do different industries have different thresholds for what's deemed acceptable from a respect?
That's a very good question, because as an incivility researcher, we've done a research on the healthcare setting, which is a very busy environment. So I suppose when I talk to a healthcare professional, as a healthcare professional before, when things get busy, respect goes out of the window. That's the norm there. And then later on, we can just have a chat and forget about that. It'll be great. We're also doing a research on teachers as well. It's a different environment because, again, you have your own set of pupils or students to mind. And then it's a totally different story. And then we also have a study in the Army, which is a really rigid environment. And you can't really say that my trainer or my leader or my platoon leader is uncivil, because we are in an environment where discipline is imposed. It's a very good question. And I don't really have a straightforward answer about the thresholds, but I suppose I can say that the level of workload is actually one factor that dictates how uncivil behaviors are kind of like go on. In academia, I don't know if it's the same thing or if it's in what's other industry, in the hospitality industry as well. So I suppose the varying backgrounds or the varying workloads dictate how the threshold is kind of like.
Just a couple of questions coming in online, Paolo. Incivility isn't always verbal. It can be it can be behavior.
Yes, it
Have
is.
you any thoughts on how to deal with people who might be acting incivilly? Is that the
Uncivil,
word?
yeah.
Okay. But not in a verbal way, not in this, maybe even behind one's back. How does one manage that in an organization?
Okay. That's a very good, indeed, very good question. Okay, I'll give one example, a very light example. I suppose not responding to emails promptly. So it takes days before someone answers an email. Now, it may be considered as someone who's really busy at work. I just don't have the time to answer emails. Or the person is just like, I just don't care about this part. I'm not going to respond. But again, going back to communication, it's all about talking to the person who is doing this behavior, approaching this person and saying, like, look, we have to curtail this because it is violating the norms of professionalism at work. But again, by communication and by talking to the person, identifying, what's good or bad, I think that's a very good starting point. And the person can actually explain why this behavior is going on. I think communication is the main key.
Another question around how does one acknowledge positive behavior? So when we see civility and respect in action, how do we acknowledge that so that it is role modeled? In
my previous workplace, we started doing, what's the term we did there in HSE? It was acknowledging respect, but there's a catchy term that we did there, that whenever someone offered help or whenever someone do organizational citizen behavior or behaviors that go beyond their work prescription, we actually acknowledge them and say, like, thank you very much, that was a very good. And then the other thing is that we put a note in our bulletin board or in our cork board to say, like, Sarah, thank you very much for your wonderful help. Thank you very much for your courteous response earlier. And the people get to see this this acknowledgement in the board, and actually it encourages a lot of people to be participated, to be respectful in the workplace. So that's one. I think it's not really gratitude. It's kind of like similar to a gratitude intervention, but it's just a bit kind of like, we're more overt in saying that you have been really respectful and helpful for my work today. Okay, we'll just take one last question online. And I want to comment that I think it's really interesting, the research we've done on what the leaders in Ireland are telling us about the need for being calm and consistent and managing one's own day. Because you make the point, the more stressed we get, we become probably uncivil in a way that we wouldn't normally be, because we're just stressed. But one of the questions online is, in a new way of working in a virtual environment, you know, is all of this leading to a rise in incivility? You know, that it's harder to be civil in a virtual space? There's a new trend now in incivility. They call it e-incivility or e-civility or incivility. The other term that I'm thinking of is techno-stress. Okay, just going back to the email example. When you send someone an email and when you read it, when someone sends you an email and when you read it, it's quite really difficult to understand the message or the meaning behind those emails, right? Because there's no verbal communication there. And I think it's an ongoing research, Sarah, and it is in the early stages now. But they definitely say that's because of the mask there in the virtual world. It is quite really difficult to discern whether this person is being incivil or it is just like part of the whole construction. For instance, the email. So it's in the early stages. But definitely it is they've recognized that incivility also happens in the virtual world. Okay. Any more questions here? Yes. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Paolo, we'll move on to Claire. Thanks for minute.
Thanks to Moran and Paolo for some very interesting presentations. Mine's going to take a slightly different format in that I'm going to take you through what we would consider a case of courageous leadership, where a CEO of a small technical firm decided to move to a 4-day work week. And the risks, it was a risky move for him, for a new small organization looking for investment. And we're going to look at how that happened. So just to note as well, I didn't do the study completely on my own. So Sarah, who's here in the room, was supporting, and our colleague Professor Deirdre O'Shea as well. So just to acknowledge their contribution to the research that we conducted. So I suppose before getting into the nitty-gritty of the case study, there has been a rising interest in the 4-day work week over the last number of years. And I suppose it's important to know that it's not a new phenomenon. We've been researching the 4-day work week since the 1970s, but it's been in the form of still a 40-hour week, but 4 compressed 10-hour days, and you still get your block of leisure time, as in your 3 days off. But now there is a greater emphasis on a meaningful reduction of hours. And in our case study, they moved from a 40-hour week to a 32-hour week. So cutting out a fifth of their week essentially. But I suppose the reasons this is becoming a potentially attractive option for organisations is very much around the rising awareness of the issue of burnout, as Sarah alluded to at the beginning, and also a notable shift in how employees feel about the world of work and a need for work-life balance and flexibility, and organisations realising that we need to cater for that in order to retain key talent. So that's a general high-level overview of a background to the 4-day work week. So we're going to call our case study, or our company in the case study, SME Tech. That's the pseudonym for the company. They were a small IT company, and like I said, they moved to a 32-hour 4-day week, and the stance they took was taking every Friday off. So all employees down tools on Thursday evening and didn't come back to work until Monday. And interestingly enough, they were a fully remote firm as well, which has its own dynamics, I suppose. So there was 18 employees at the time of the study across 4 teams. And it is important to note that they operate an agile project management framework. So they break their projects down into cycles, and there's tracking for continuous improvement and continuous communication over those cycles. So I think that's an important context to give to the study that we're about to look at. So why did SME Tech opt for a 4-day week? Well, the CEO was very aware of the negative consequences of burnout and didn't want that to happen in this organisation. So his objective was to promote a healthy work-life balance, and thought he was going to trial the 4-day work week in SME Tech in order to see how that impacted work-life balance. But obviously, keeping performance in the back of his mind, it's risky if we lose performance. The employees have adjusted. The trial was for 10 weeks. So the employees, by the end of the 10 weeks, would have adjusted to their 4-day work week. And if it didn't work performance-wise, do we take that back off them? So there was a risk there around that, but also an acknowledgement of the work-life balance being important for acquiring and retaining key technical skills for the IT industry. So I'm going to spend most of my time on the how they did it, because I think that's really interesting. The results are the results, but I think the process that they took to make this a success, spoiler alert, it was a success for them, and they're still doing it 2 years later. The process they took is what's really important, and it's although they operate in an agile framework, there are things that other companies can take from their approach, that not necessarily to implement the 4-day work week, but to make life a bit easier for people, or maybe to work more efficiently. So they had a considerable lead-in time. So that's important to note. They didn't just decide on a Friday, we'll just work 4 days next week. There was obviously a huge amount of planning that went into it. And their Scrum Master went about these 4 steps in order to determine where they could find efficiencies in the work that they do. So first, they went to look at how does the team collaborate with each other? How do they communicate and align their priorities with each other across each of the 4 teams, and then as a whole in the organisation? Then how are changing priorities communicated? Does every priority that changes need a 2-hour meeting to discuss the priority? Then the real reason behind why certain meetings are held. And then finally, like any good change initiative, getting the perspective of the individuals doing the jobs. So asking each employee what they saw as the key disruptors to their workflow. Where can we find efficiencies in the workflow? So these are the core actions that came out of that investigation. So they got rid of almost 50% of their meeting time that was lost, their time that was lost to meetings. They gained 50% of that back, despite losing a day a week. So they eliminated unnecessary meetings. They found that there was meetings that they were meeting for the sake of meeting and the sake of updating, but there was other more efficient ways to provide updates. they put their meetings in blocks. So, and they had them parallel. So each team was in meetings at the same time. So that the idea behind that was to create a lot more focus time in the day for employees. So if everyone's in meetings at the same time, everyone has the same kind of block of time for focus and getting focused in their job. A lot of the meetings were moved to the evening as well, because our productivity tends to be higher in the morning. So allowing people to have that focus time early in the day they felt like it was a more productive strategy. They also ensured that meetings, now the way they work in sprints. So there's planning every 2 weeks around what their week looks like. So they ensured that meetings didn't fall on bank holidays, so they weren't lost due to days off. And then in terms of the planning, they looked at asynchronous updates. So how can we update each other without having to have a meeting for every single update that's required during the week? They had weekly roadmap meetings as well to make sure that everybody was in alignment. And the Scrum Master put together a productivity booklet or booster booklet for their employees. And this looked at how to maximize your own individual productivity and looking at things that are beyond my knowledge in terms of circadian rhythm and how that impacts how you work and your productivity levels during the day and so on. But what was really surprising, by taking this approach, they increased their focus hours by 8 hours a week, despite losing 8 hours a week. So they gained significant efficiencies by just reviewing and largely focusing on their meeting structure. Like, how many of us have been in a meeting that has gone on far too long and probably hasn't achieved anything, you know? So they just started to look at how can we work smarter and have kind of more controlled and efficient meeting structure that can give us more time to do what we need to do as individuals to be productive in the organisation. And then I also mentioned that they had focus days. Some of those were complete focus days. So each individual got at least 2 full days to focus uninterrupted with no meetings every 2 weeks. So that was really critical to giving them time to be productive as well. So that's the how they did it, and the results, well, performance improved. So they reduced average cycle time, which is their measure of how quick things get done. So the fact that it took less time to go through a cycle was impressive. They improved their ability to predict how well they're going to perform in their roles, like in terms of setting targets. And they increased their PR throughput, which is basically a unit of something being created at the end of the cycle. So that was enhanced. And then in terms of the employee experience, which was a lot of the motivation behind the CEO's approach, there was a positive sense of well-being. So we did 10 weekly surveys through the 10 weeks of the trial. And then we did focus groups about 20 weeks after their first week as a 4-day week. And they had a positive sense of well-being, low levels of stress and fatigue, and there was a significant reduction in work-family conflict. In the focus groups, they did say that there was a marginally more intense atmosphere when they were working in the 4 days as opposed to the 5. But they did admit that during the 5-day week, there was some hours of procrastination in there, but the 4-day week kind of forced them to put that aside and be quite focused in the 4 days. What was really important in the focus groups was, for this company, the 3-day weekend was really important, and particularly having the Friday off. They wouldn't have been that enthusiastic about it being a Monday or a Wednesday. They really wanted the Friday off to disconnect from work and be able to be fully present with their families on the weekend. And also, the organisation was quite flexible before moving to the 4-day week, and they didn't want to lose that. They'd rather keep 5 days and keep their flexible structure than move to 4 days and lose their flexibility. Now, fortunately, it was an option for them to keep flexibility and move to the 4-day week, but the flexibility was really important for the employees. So what are my key takeaways from this study? Like, this is a very high-level overview of what we did, but in terms of key takeaways, I suppose the 4-day week did have a positive impact on both performance and employee well-being, but there was a lot of planning to get there. So there was a lot of looking for where we can find efficiencies, but they found it because there was a will and there was strong leadership and buy-in at the top for this to work. The importance, like with any change, to consult the employees when the change is being made. And like crucially, the CEO led this. The CEO bought into it. He drove it. He made a decision that might not be popular with other stakeholders that he wanted to engage. But he took that risk and it has paid off for both the company and the employees. So that's it for me, and I'm welcome any questions.
The obvious question is, was cost a factor in the decision to move to 4 days? Was there a reduction in salaries for the employees?
No, that's something I should have mentioned. They took the model 100% pay for 80% time for 100% productivity. So no, there was no reduction in pay.
And follow-up is, did the company see employees working some hours on the Friday?
No, well, I'll say no for most employees. The CEO himself admitted that he was using Fridays, but it meant he got Saturday and Sunday off before he was using Saturdays. But every other employee was sticking to the 4 days. Yeah.
Is there any drawback in that? Anything that was negatively?
Well, there was definitely things they had to consider, like in terms of other stakeholders that they were working with, clients and so on. But when they obviously took that into consideration before moving, and they spoke to clients, and they felt that clients tend to be winding down on a Friday anyway, so being off Friday didn't really impact. But that would have been the one thing that they would have looked at initially, yeah.
2 questions, Claire. So firstly, just interested to see attrition rates or headcount reduction pre versus post. And secondly, in terms of the employee experience, our employee satisfaction rates, again, pre versus post.
Yeah, so that's a good point. In terms of, we don't have the headcount and retention rates, that wasn't part of the study, but it would be actually interesting to go back and look at. In terms of the pre versus post employee experience, we were brought on too late to do that. Ideally, we would have done the surveys in the previous cycle as well, but we were brought on like the week before they launched in, so it just was, but ideally it would be good to compare that. Yeah.
We're getting a bit tight on time, so I'm just going to take one question. Well, it's 2 or 3 people have asked this. Excuse me. The impact on suppliers and customers having to deal with a company that only works a 4-day week, and also investors. I know the CEO had views on that. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, so I suppose in terms of customers and so on, like if you're working a customer facing business that you need to be engaging with customers, you'll take a different approach to the Friday off. You can make it work. There are other ways to make it work, but you won't have everyone off and nobody facing the customer on a Friday. You'd scatter your day off in the week. There was, I suppose, we kind of picked up on maybe investors not knowing that this was a really big strategy for the company, because I guess there was a perception that maybe if people are working 4-day week, they're not working hard enough, which is kind of an interesting take on it, but it's working for them. Like, it's working for their bottom line. It's working for their employees. So it will be interesting to see how other people view that. We didn't go broader, I suppose, in terms of looking at other stakeholders.
Yeah. But some really interesting threads here between a real act of courage on the part of the organisation and technology driving the intensification of work, possibly leading to incivility, and how this whole work-life balance, it was a happier, more satisfied group and organisation as a result of this one big act of courage on everybody's part.
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
this out.
In terms of numbers, like the numbers showed the improvement in life experience, but the focus groups really highlighted that, like people spending time with family that they haven't really had the chance to, and that was really nice to see. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maeve. What would the does the future hold for us, Maeve?
Good question.
Sarah.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm just going to spend some time talking about our current research project that is called the Call to Lead. Okay, and before I get into the discussion, I just want to say a big thank you to the participants that were involved in our focus group at the start of the year. I know some of them are here in person, and more of us are joining online. So I just want to say a big thank you to them for taking the time and the energy to get involved, because without them we wouldn't be able to do this research. So for those of you who are not familiar with this project, this Call to Lead research was commissioned and sponsored by ICBE Business Excellence SkillNet, and it was initiated as a result of previous research that we did back in 2022 around the whole area of sustainable leadership. And one of the outcomes from that research was that senior leaders were telling us at the time that they had a lot of concern about the next generation's reluctance or unwillingness to step up to lead. So as a result of that, we initiated this project and took it out to industry to see what they were saying. So this is just an overview of the project to date. So when we first went and spoke to industry through our WorkFutures Lab, we got a very positive response. And that in itself is indicative of the fact that a lot of organisations are all experiencing the same problems in terms of their concerns around leadership succession. So we had 14 different organisations that were involved, and they were made up of the public and private sector from various different industries such as medtech, pharma, banking, insurance, policing, and civil service. So we had 110 participants, which was a great number, and they all came from what we call the extended leadership team. So those that may be a step down from the leadership table on site, or those that may be on the leadership team on site but are a couple of steps down from global leadership. Okay, and also potential leaders, people that were identified as potential future leaders in the organisation. So we had 110 participants, and we put them through 30 focus groups over a 3-month period back at the start of the year. And the focus groups, you know, we had they were very insightful. We had some great discussion, and these are some of just the preliminary findings, and I want to stress they're preliminary because the research is still ongoing. We're in the middle of publishing a survey, so we need to get some of that data back just to validate what we think is happening here. So the first one here is the work-life balance, and this is something that came up time and time again. In every focus group that we did, we were talking about work-life balance. And the perception here is that if I take on a senior role or that I step up to lead, that there's going to be this is going to have a negative impact on my work-life balance. And that is because the general consensus is that in order to be effective and successful in a senior leadership role, it does require a lot of hours and a lot of hard work. The other interesting point to note is that traditionally when we talk about work-life balance, it was always kind of seen as a female concern, because traditionally women were the ones that shouldered all the responsibilities. We're all nodding here. Ladies in agreement. We shouldered the responsibilities for the caring responsibilities and the household responsibilities. But what we've seen here is that there's been a shift now in that male employees are also looking for a better work-life balance. So it's not just exclusive to females anymore. The other interesting point as well is the social status in relation to work-life balance, but the social status that we would have associated with your rank or your title or how high up you are in an organisation. So in the past, there was a lot of importance associated with this. And as one lady pointed out, that maybe, you know, if you think back 20 years ago, we were very much focused on career progression, moving up and up and up as fast as we could. And maybe that was reflective of the times we were living. We were in the Celtic Tiger, everybody wanted more, everything was a bit crazier. So there was a lot of importance placed on your role or your title status. But this doesn't seem to be the case anymore. What people are more impressed with now is whether you've achieved a very positive work-life balance. Okay. The second one then is the enormity of the role. And this was something that came up when we asked people about what do they see when they look up at senior leaders? You know, what do they see up there? What do they think the job is involved? What are the realities of sitting at the top table? And there was some very positive discussion around it. People described it as being, you know, a brave thing to do and courageous, which it certainly is. But also people talked about the pressure, that it was highly pressurized. It was very, it was all consuming. There was a huge workload that seemed to be, you know, it was relentless. There was a lot of pressure there, and other people spoke about, you know, there was very little room for error. There's very little room for error. There was a lot of exposure at that level. And that, as one individual said, summed it up nicely, the air is a lot thinner up there. That kind of resonated with a lot of people when they spoke about the pressures there. And another individual said, sure, you'd want to be a lunatic to take on that role. And that's probably, you know, is that what we're saying here? That are we saying that the type of leadership in practice is actually a form of lunacy? And again, there's a few people nodding here. So, you know, that's a concern. You know, that's what we think leadership is. So there is the danger here that the enormity of the role itself can act as a deterrent for someone to step up to lead. Okay, so we need to look at that, and we need to ask the question that is this type of leadership we have now or we're practicing, is it sustainable? And what message is it sending to the generation below us? Because they're looking up here, and are they going to step up to lead when they see what's happening currently? The other item here I find is organisational politics. So again, this is something that came up when we asked people about what do you think of the culture of leadership, the style of leadership that exists in your organisation. And again, it was very, very positive. But some people talked about the power and politics at play, you know, cheap shots, point scoring for the sake of point scoring, maybe calling people out publicly. And also people described about being in meetings where it was a case of backs to the wall, that you were on your guard. You had to be on high alert because there was a danger that if you faltered at all or showed any sense of weakness, that you would be taken out. So it was kind of, it was pressurized. Now that doesn't sound pretty, and I'm not for one second saying that this is what was happening, that there was some sort of, you know, toxic leadership at play in any of these organizations. But it is something to be mindful that if the organization, if there's a lot of politics and power play, it can potentially deter people from stepping up. So people that are well capable, rather than going down a leadership development path, they decide to sit in an individual contributor role because they don't want the hassle of having to deal with the power and politics, and also managing people. They don't want to have to manage conflict. They don't want to have to manage performance. So they're happier to stay in an individual contributor role. Okay, now, of course, we have to acknowledge there's always some element of power and politics at play, but we just need to make sure that it's happening in a more positive and business orientated environment or in fashion. The lack of support from the organization. So it's lonely at the top. And this is something that resonated with a lot of those individuals that we spoke to. So they spoke about when they transitioned to a senior leadership role, maybe for the first time, that they got very little support from the organization. And it was at this point that they needed the support more than ever. They all spoke about how vulnerable they felt in the first 6 or 12 months of that role, how it was the most challenging time, but they didn't get any support from the organization. And what they had to do then was rely on their own social network. So that social capital that they built up over the years, they were the ones that they touched base with to look for support or to bounce ideas off. So there seems to be perception in the broader organization that because you've proven yourself and now that you've reached this top level or a senior role, that you've proven yourself, that you're capable of doing the job, and that off you go and just do it, and you don't need support. But that the opposite is true. And it's, you know, as leaders said, it's a stark contrast to when they first put their, you know, steps on the leadership development pathway, that they got a lot of support at the early days. They had mentors and they had stretch opportunities, etc. They got to try on leadership. But when they actually got to a senior role, that support system kind of just deserted them. So I think the point here is that organizations need to step up and they need to support their leaders when they're trying to make that transition into senior leadership roles. The fifth one then, generational differences. And I won't dwell on this too much now because there was a lot of debate and discussion about this in the focus groups. But I think everyone here is aware that there's a very different, that the younger generation have a very different mindset and expectation about what work is and their expectations in the workplace. So the easy thing to do is to dismiss them as snowflakes, saying that they're not resilient enough, they're not willing to put in the hours. But we do need to take what they're saying into consideration, because we can see that the style of leadership may not be working. Like we spoke about how people find, it's all consuming, it's so pressurized. Sarah alluded to the study we did earlier 2 years ago about sustainable leaders, when we interviewed over 70 senior leaders and 35% of them talked about how they were burnt out. So clearly that the practice of leadership at the moment isn't working. So why would the younger generation step up to it? Because they look at it and they say, I don't want part of that, I'm not interested. So they just step away, okay? And very quickly, risk then is another item. So like leadership is now becoming a risky business. There's a lot more public scrutiny involved due to the prevalence of social media. It's, if you make an error now, it's not just, you can't really contain it within the organization itself. It's out there and everybody knows about it. So the people that we interviewed, they acknowledge that there is an element, they perceive that there's an element of risk in stepping up, but we have to try and understand what kind of risk they seek. It doesn't seem to be operational. They've no problem making operational decisions and taking risk there, but the personal risk and the professional risk, we need to understand that a bit more and then try to understand how the organization, what can the organization do to mitigate against that risk, okay? Because we don't want it to act as a deterrent for someone to step up to lead, okay? So as I said, they're just the preliminary findings. The research is still ongoing. We just published a survey, and I know some people here have completed that survey already, but I would ask you to please share it with your peers, and anyone that's joining us here online, we can send on a link as well, because obviously the more responses we get, the richer our data set. Okay. And that's it.
Hey, thank you, Maeve. Any questions from the room? We'll start with the room.
Thank you very much for that. You touched on social status, and one of my questions is, through your study, are you seeing it being more prominent in a certain gender?
The social status, no, I wouldn't say it's prominent in a particular gender. I think it's something that it's funny in that when we were talking to some of the senior leaders that were part of this study, and when they talked about the younger generation, the 20-something-year-olds, they often mentioned that, they were saying that they wanted, they liked having a title, but they don't want to put in the hours. Okay, that's the younger generation, 20-something-year-olds. But I guess when I'm talking about the work-life balance and the social status there, it's probably that age group that are maybe in their mid-30s to early 40s that have still been around the block and lived through that period, the Celtic Tiger, when it was very much, we wanted to move up and up and up. And there was that big element in terms of social status. People liked having the title, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It's not, people are happy now that if I'm, say, a senior engineer and my partner is a senior engineer, we have a nice balance here and we have a nice work-life balance. So I'm not chasing a title. It's not going to do anything for me personally. I don't see it as important anymore. My importance now lies on whether I have a nice work-life balance. So it's not related to any particular either gender. It's just kind of a general thing we're seeing come through now. Yeah. Questions?
Yeah.
That's great.
I think you've given me too much to think about.
Yeah, Lisa, you.
Sorry, I'll come in again,
Yeah,
sorry.
you're fine.
Just,
Okay.
and again, it's the pressurized and that politics or the power play. Again,
Yeah.
back to, you know, I think it's somewhat, I think if I think about my career 20 years ago, certainly I could see it at that stage. And it's a little bit surprising that we're now in 2024. Naively, I would have thought, or I would have felt that has changed somewhat. And it's a little bit surprising that it hasn't. But again, are you seeing it in certain sectors or certain size companies? Is it coming through in certain areas?
No, I wouldn't say that, like, we had a mix of private and public sector. I can say that it's very obvious in one, that's more obvious or prevalent in the public sector than private. Generally, when people talked about it, they talked about it very, very positive, like the culture in the organization was very positive, but they could see things happening at meetings. And I guess it depends on the context of the meeting, that if it's in a very pressurized environment and there's a lot at stake, then you might be trying to score, a cheap shot or political points over someone else. The other thing as well that some people mentioned was, like, if there's a personal agenda, this is where it sometimes can get a bit messy, that I'm sitting on the leadership at the leadership table here, but my own personal agenda, I only envisage myself sitting here for 2 years because I want to move to the next level. So I want to bring what concerns me to the table and get my work done here. And that mightn't necessarily be good for the rest of the people sitting at the table with me. So sometimes personal agendas can get in the way. But I think, generally the perception is that workplaces are quite positive. There's still an element there, but I wouldn't say it's in any way toxic in terms of the organisations that we were dealing with this research.
I just have one final question.
Yeah,
Sorry, Sarah.
fine.
Just on generational differences.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see if we're moving away from that terminology and that stereotyping. Are we seeing a bit of a wane on it? I know.
It's hard to say, really. It's hard to say. Like when we use the word snowflake, it was kind of done in jest. Obviously, we wouldn't have those senior leaders calling the younger generation snowflakes or anything. It was used in jest. But I can't really answer that question. It's hard to say. Are we moving away from it? When you're having those discussions in focus groups, it is very relaxed. It's very informal. So people are very free to talk openly. Excuse me. So I'm not sure. Are those kind of terms being used in the workplace?
I know
as it is.
I know G. McCarthy would have partnered with Emma Parry on doing a lot of research in that area a number of years ago. And I suppose their studies would have shown that, there's no real finding in it as such, and it can be unhelpful.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of a general thought that would have been in the arena, in the HR arena in particular. But I think it's difficult to step away from it because it is, as you say, it does crop up, and that I was just interested to see to be reflected in your research.
Okay, there's a large number of questions coming in on this topic online, but what I'm going to do, Lisa, is while you're coming up to talk, I'm going to throw a few of them at you, as that you might respond to them.
Yeah.
As you talk about your own leadership journey, because they are questions like, are we preparing people enough, supporting them enough to step up to leadership, to deal with these kind of challenges? Are we supporting leaders in the roles already? Because it's all talk about role modeling, all of these positive behaviors, but yet we're working them so hard that they're so stressed. It's very hard to role model positive behaviors. And are we seeing that there's always been politics at play in leadership, but all the perks and social status of leadership, I don't know that they're taking away all the perks. We still pay leaders a lot of money, but just the social status of leadership, is that being removed or less valued in society? Is that one of the main drivers why people are weighing up the transactional risk versus social status and perks. It's not worth it. So you might, as you talk about your own leadership journey, keep those questions in mind.
Yes, no problem. So the first thing I'll do is introduce myself properly. So my name is Laura Walsh and I work for Dell Technologies. I'm based here in Limerick. And the first thing I always tell people is I am living my second life at Dell. I went back to college at 30 with a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. I drove 104 miles a day for 4 years to do my course. I held down 2 part-time jobs and I managed not to go entirely crazy. I will caveat that with I started off as pretty mental at the start anyway. My previous years of working were very much on the operational side of the house. My family business, we had an oil company and a petrol station. I started doing accounts and books when I was about 11 years old. I was handed a Dell computer in 1996 when I was 13 and told, make that work there, pet. So I did. I am such a thriver in a panic universe. I have so much experience in making sure that other people are coming along the journey that I realized so many times I forgot about Orla. And that's fine. For a long time, I was mammy, you know, and I kept the lights on and I kept the journey going and I kept everybody relatively happy some of the time, which is really, I think, all we can aim for. And as I walked through my life, reflecting in the past couple of years as I've started what I call the informal leadership journey, I realized that I have stepped up so many times in my life to lead in everything from being a young child at organising what we're going to play in the yard. Yes, I was that Aussie girl in an all-girls school, but I was also the one who stepped back and let other people join in when we had an odd number. And I look back now and I realize I was actually leading then, and I was leading from the middle. I'm the youngest child of 5, an odd number, which is never good when you have a group of children, but I was also the youngest by quite a large amount. So the learnings and the teachings my siblings gave me, sometimes they were great and sometimes they were, this is how you don't do things. I kind of pulled them all together. And one thing that the more I listened to my wonderful, wonderful speakers here, you were absolutely amazing and fascinating. And I've 10 million questions for you. I began to think about things that have influenced how I have had the courage to do things in my life. And it's actually something I spoke to Sarah about when I was giving me a quick blurb. And one of the things I quoted was a thing called the Serenity Prayer. So when I am back to the wall, in these big crazy decisions, I am going, okay. And I always cut to the last line. So if you don't know the prayer, it's I grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I don't harp on the courage thing. Maybe I should, but I'm sitting there typing frantically or pacing frantically going, wisdom to know the difference, wisdom to know the difference, wisdom to know the difference. And that's what I was touching on when I spoke about the courage side of the house. How do I know when this is the absolutely wonderful risk or this is the panic stations? I could jeopardize it all. And where's the line between them? So as I move into that informal, glorious leadership, I bring all of those little elements with me. So I bring that just one line of wisdom to know the difference. And I take that and I share that as a self-awareness tool. The other thing that I do is I introduce, especially our younger emerging leaders, our grad hires, our interns, all of these wonderful people who have so much potential that they don't even know exists. I bring them to a thing called the desiderata. So I'm a poetry nut. And I remember in my home house when I was a kid, on the back of the bathroom door, if you don't be minded, was the Desiderata, which is a poem by Max Ehrmann written in the 1920s. But the first lines are, go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, be on good terms with all people. And the final thing is, listen to everyone, even the people you don't want to listen to, because they have their stories. That's just the very start. And to me, those two things combined essentially made me the absolutely unhinged, crazy, but quite successful person that I am now. When I went back to college, I had worked in small industries all over the west of Ireland, all over West Clare. I had done accounts for hairdressers and coffee shops. I had worked as a transport manager. I'm a certified transport manager and dangerous goods and logistics advisor, which means I was transporting inflammable and explosive materials by road. Part of my job was to go and check a truck to make sure that when it hit a bump, it didn't go boom. And I didn't realize that the drivers I worked with or the kids who took the buses that I worked with in some of the transport I worked with, I had their lives in my hands because I had to do it. There was these things that I had to fulfill and it wasn't my company. So I was just hitting along these paces. And when I went to college, I earned the moniker of college mom with my beautiful, wonderful college teammates. And we were a team and they were the best learning I ever had on how differently people need to be led. And the biggest lesson I've ever learned is when you need to know that you are not the leader someone needs. For me, I know when I need to step back and say, actually, one of this group of leaders that I am involved with needs to step in here. Because I am not the right person. This is not the right time. This is not the right project. For me, the best knowledge from a leadership perspective is the knowledge of your own self. And then it's the knowledge of the people you're surrounded with. Finding a one element that you can create or maintain a relationship with the people you work with. When I started in Dell, I was an analyst, low ranking, low grade, 34-year-old grad hire. Great fun. I love a good challenge. I was lucky enough to be hired on my second job interview, my first one being in the area of transport and logistics, which I was actually qualified for. And I was sent to an internal referral to bring me down to an enablement team. And basically their whole thing was we got ideas in from our customers and we had to try and figure out how do we make these happen with the infrastructure we have, with the colleges we have, with the everything that we have. And as I pushed through 4.5 years in that, I went from being I am a project manager to I'm the lead of winning culture. I'm organising all of the get-togethers. I'm taking the feedback from all of our team members to find out what it is we need to do to build engagement. I was co-leading our Pride ERG as somebody who's very proudly a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. I was like, I'm going to step into this because you know what? I have 2 kids and I'm married to a man. People don't realise that I could be this person as well. I also have ADHD. You'd never guess by the speed that I speak at or the fact that I will hop topics and still come back to where I started. These are what I call my core elements of who I am. I am an integral being made up of about 20 different people. And that 4.5 years of enablement, where I dealt with customers, partners, co-workers, I realized that I found myself sitting by my own design in the middle as this little hub, dealing out with all of these spokes. I had positioned myself. But the most important thing I realized was my direct manager, who's the director of the company, and indeed the vice president that I rolled into. They had all sat down and had a conversation and said, look at her go. We'll just leave her off. She's doing really good stuff. And that's why I wasn't afraid to step forward and lead, because it's an instinctual part of who I am. I want to coordinate. I want to make people happy. I want to drive them for their best thing. And sometimes we're not giving the freedom to lead to our team members, to our upcoming amazing drivers of whatever, because we're afraid of their method or their madness. After I finished that 4.5 years, I applied for a job internally that was actually held by Dave Griffin, who's a regular contributor to these things, and he now works out in Modular. And Dave had gone, he'd moved jobs, and I took over this job thinking I get to communicate and I get to drive engagement and I get to talk to people outside. And I didn't realize I just signed up for a site leadership role of 970 people, co-leading a staff of about 4,500 from a project's perspective with 2 other women, one in Cork and one in Dublin. And I literally started to build into this job and I went, oh, I did it again. What in the name of God am I doing? And as I settled in with the fact that, okay, I'm sitting at a leadership table with all of these directors, senior directors, vice presidents, so on and so forth, and they all spoke to me as I was Orla, with the pink hair, the blue hair, the green hair, the big woolly jumper, all of these things. I realized that none of those things matter because I had 4.5 years of amazing leaders giving me the space. So when I went into a room of people who didn't really essentially know me very well, they knew my reputation, they knew what I'd achieved. They didn't really know that I was going to go in and start doing some mad stuff. I also joined this role in the middle of COVID when we had no one on site. How do you lead and engage in an environment where people essentially are isolated, upset, and lonely? And it's a really good point, and I have notes here, I have 2 sets of notes here, because again, the ADHD. Somebody said I was really brave to take on that role. And I thought, I've never been called brave in my life. And then I thought back and I went, oh no, when I dyed my hair pink, someone called me brave, and I looked at them and I went, no, my hair is supposed to be pink. And I thought about it in the same frame. I'm supposed to be this leader. What we need to do to bring leaders out of the, I suppose, ether is to give them the space to find their style, their matching, their hair color, their whatever it is that will allow them to align and bring people with them. When we have those difficult decisions that we need to make, to say, I don't know if we can do this, this or this, to be able to present them with the facts, but also to be able to share that heart share of conversation. Why are you afraid to take this step? Why is it you are stopping yourself? What are you afraid of if you let me go forward and do this? And I think that empowerment is one of the biggest parts from a leadership, to go from informal or accidental leader to a formalized manager leader from a level. And I'll stop there because I could talk for several years, you know that.
Thank you, Orla. We'll open it up to, if people have questions for Orla as a leader or anyone who's spoken this morning, if you've general questions, we have about 10 minutes left to do that.
Orla, thanks very much for sharing your story. Very insightful and very inspiring. And I suppose when you're talking, I immediately fall to, I see you as an authentic leader, brave in being yourself. And how do you instill that in those that you are trying to bring along the journey with you? Give them that autonomy to do that.
Well, the first thing I do is this, right? Whenever I talk, I am 100% my authentic self. I've been known to even occasionally swear accidentally, a little too authentic. But I have a group and I refer to them as, they're my baby ducks. They are the people that I see really changing the face of how we work. And I don't just mean in Dell, I mean as humans. And they are this incredibly diverse set of people who are aged from about 22 to in their mid-40s. And I'm 41, nearly 42 years of age. And the way I instill it in them is, I'll take a moment to go and sit next to them and go, I saw that thing you did. Not an email, not a text to their boss, not an award through a HR system. These all have their place. But nothing is ever going to replace the fact that I'm proud of you is something that we don't say to one another. And the power of those words, they will bring people forward every time. And if you share that pride in their ability and recognize their courage or their authenticity in your authentic self, they're going to step into who they're supposed to be much freer because they know someone has their back. You know, you start off and you stand in front of them and you say, okay, just follow me. It'll be fine. And then slowly you start to move to the side and they're next to you and you're going, I'm here, I've got your back. Everything's fine. And then you watch them move forward and you get to stand in the background and watch them grow and take off. And that's why I always call it baby ducks. That's what mama ducks do, you know. And I think the only way that we can instill that is to show them, to remind them that we see the little things that they do.
Just a question from online. Orla, what can we do to make leadership roles more attractive, bearing in mind Maeve's research? What are you doing? What can leaders do that people will look at you and say, yeah, I'm ready, I will step up?
Yeah. I think the first thing we do is we recognize that we all do it. We all see those emerging talents coming up and we think, okay, what I need to do is, you know, get them their leadership training and make sure that they're aware with the executive structure and do all of those business education things. We absolutely have to do all of those things. But we also need to take that time, as I said at the very start, to get to know what is their work-life balance look like now and where do they want to get to. So if their work-life balance now is already unsatisfactory, we're never going to get them on board with extra responsibilities or extra ownership or extra visibility or pressure or exposure to politics. We need to look at what they're battling right now at this situation. We need to figure out how we, as in them, and that leadership team, that executive leadership team, or that support structure that is behind you, are going to rectify that. And in doing that, you'll actually see a catch-on effect around the other people who are at the same level of potential leadership, and they'll start to examine it themselves. So how do you look at their vitals, where they're at right now, and how do you put things in place with them to make sure that's maintained and achieved?
Okay. Another question from online, and we've known this for many years about the role of self-awareness, and that the highly successful leaders are typically found to be very self-aware. Do you think that's as important as ever, or how do we develop that?
So I think the first step is self-awareness. But you can be the most self-aware person in the world and not realize that, for example, Sarah, you started coughing there and I went and got you water. That's not me being self-aware, that's also me being aware of my surroundings. You can be ultimately, like, psychologically A1 in self-awareness and not realize that there are other people in the room. What you need to realize is how you utilize your personality, yourself, your tone, your physicality, whatever those things are, to relate to somebody else's self-awareness bubble, is what I call it. To me, it's like, how can I build a bridge between those two things? So that emotional intelligence that is required. If you have emotional intelligence and no self-awareness, you're in trouble. You're going to misdirect yourself. And if you have self-awareness and no emotional intelligence, you're going to drive everybody bonkers, really, and ultimately upset them.
Yeah. I personally have a question I'm very interested in that we might close on before we say goodbye to everybody, which is, do you think organisations today are doing enough to nurture and sustain people like you?
The oddballs.
Well,
so, I mean, the people like me is, I say this when I talk to young groups as well, in particular groups from DESH areas or for young women. Which box do you want to put me in today? Am I a woman? Am I a punk? Am I the girl with the pink hair? Am I, you know, the girl with the bruises because she was camping at a folk festival? Am I the loud, outspoken extrovert? Am I the ADHD person? Am I the member of the LGBTQIA+ community? Which am I to you? And you can ask every one of them, and to every one of them, I'm a different one of those boxes. So are people doing enough? We will never do enough to support our people, whether they're me's or whether they're Sarah's or whether, you know, they're Claire's. We can always do more. We will never be able to do more unless we start to talk to all of the versions of the me's and the you's at a really honest and face-to-face level, which is why the power of the work that the Kemmy School are doing is just monumental, because you're offering that free space for people to come, that conversation without consequence. It's like therapy. And we get to share and learn from those things that people will share in these sections that maybe they won't otherwise, but we can always do more. So
I think that's an excellent point to end on, the excellent
Sarah.
work that the Kemmy Business School are doing. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank the people who made the effort to come in and press the flesh and have a coffee with us this morning. I would like to thank my colleagues in the Kemmy Business School for sharing their time and their research. I'd like to thank my colleague in Executive Education, Gillian O'Sullivan, who event managed everything today, and the Wizard of Oz behind the banner here, Keith Curley, who is our marketing manager in the Kemmy Business School and supported us greatly as well. For those of you that made it today, we will be sending you out our Sustainable Leadership Report. We will send you the case study in the SME-Tech 4-day week. We will also send you a link, and I put it up in the chat, to our Call to Lead survey. So please, for those of you in HR roles and organisations, in leadership roles and organisations, please spread that survey far and wide. We need to understand what people are seeing when they look up to leadership. That is the next critical piece of our work. So thank you all very much, and we will say goodbye from the Kemmy Business School, and we will hope to see you at the next WorkFutures Lab in September. Thank you. Bye now.